They always said the house was full of stories. But they never said some of those stories would be ripped out, sold, and bid on by strangers with cold hands and colder hearts. I was standing on the edge of the old gravel driveway, clutching a coffee cup that had long gone cold. The auctioneer's voice carried through the open windows, cheerful, aggressive, eager. My grandmother's lace curtains flapped in the wind like surrender flags. I hadn't been inside in 4 years. Not since the funeral. Not since my mother made it clear that I didn't have a say in any of it. That the house and everything in it would be liquidated because that's what made sense. "No one lives here anymore, Alara," she had said, voice so practical it could have sliced bread. "It's just a building. Just a building." She hadn't stood in the parlor at 3 a.m, whispering secrets to the moon through the stained glass window. She hadn't run her fingers over the dented edge of the fireplace mantel, the one my grandfather had carved with his boot accidentally during a New Year's dance in 1962. She hadn't opened the cedar chest in the attic and pulled out the brooch, with trembling hands, afraid to breathe on it too hard. They were selling it today. All of it. I had gotten the flyer by accident. Someone from the auction house had mailed it to my old dorm address in Manchester, forwarded from my grad school office. And the moment I saw the header, "Historic Thornton Estate Contents to be liquidated," I had dropped everything. I hadn't told my parents I was coming. They would have tried to stop me. Or worse, welcomed me with that tight smile my mother always wore when she was trying not to say, "You always make things harder than they have to be." I parked across the street from the estate under the shadow of a maple tree I used to climb. A woman in a red blazer was ushering people up the front steps. I didn't recognize her. The crowd was mostly gray-haired couples, antique pickers, the kind of men who knew the exact resale value of a Civil War comb. Inside, everything felt wrong. Gone were the rugs, the photographs, the warmth. Every item had a tag hanging off it like an autopsy report. The couch I had broken my arm on had a sticky note labeled number 42. The dining table that seated 5 generations was being eyed by a man with 2 clean shoes. I wanted to scream, or cry, or break something so the rest would stay. Then I saw it. The brooch. It sat inside a glass box with a velvet backdrop, under a spotlight like a museum exhibit. Lot number 77. The description was clinical. Victorian gold filigree brooch with opal center and seed pearl accents. What it didn't say, what no one here knew, was that it had been handed down from mother to daughter for 6 generations, that it was given on the eve of a wedding, that it was worn at births, funerals, and whispered over during family oaths. It wasn't jewelry, it was legacy. I stepped closer. The bidding hadn't started yet, but there was a card on the table, preview only, bidding begins at 3:30. I checked the time, 3:08. That gave me exactly 22 minutes to figure out how to outbid every last soul in this room. But I had a problem. Or more accurately, 11 of them, all tied to a Visa card that was currently maxed out from 2 months of unexpected expenses, including a radiator replacement, 2 emergency vet visits, and a disastrous failed prototype launch for my freelance wearable tech side hustle. My bank account balance was a cruel joke. I backed away, mind spinning. "You okay?" I turned. A girl, maybe 9 or 10, stood behind me with a purple notebook tucked under her arm. She had the kind of eyes that looked too wide for her face, the kind that saw more than they should. "Fine," I lied. She pointed to the brooch. "You like it." "It's not from me. It belonged to someone I loved." She nodded. "I like the shiny part. Looks like a raindrop." I smiled in spite of myself. "It kind of does." Then a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, the bidding for lot number 77 will begin shortly in the main parlor. Please make your way there now." My throat closed. I had to do something. I reached for my phone. No messages from my parents. No offers of, "Hey, do you want to come salvage something sentimental before we auction it off to the highest bidder?" Of course not. I dialed Paige, my former roommate, and the closest thing I had to a financial advisor/emotional tether. "I need a favor," I whispered as I ducked into the hallway. "I'm about to do something incredibly irrational and probably legally binding. That's my favorite, Alara. Hit me, I explained. Fast, in pieces, with panic. You don't have the cash, she said after a beat. And you maxed out the card. What about the crypto account? Frozen, still under review. How much do you think it'll go for? No idea. Thousands. She whistled. You could try to get a payday loan. Or maybe set up a pledge stream. If you pitch it right, someone might back you. Emotional inheritance stories do numbers online. I stared at the parlor entrance. Lot number 76 was closing. I had minutes. Okay, I said. Okay, I'll try. I shoved through the door and pulled up my live stream app. Hi, I said into the phone, my voice shaking. My name is Alara Quinn, and in 7 minutes, someone is going to try and buy my great-grandmother's heirloom out from under me, but I'm not letting that happen without a fight. People turned. I kept going. This brooch isn't just antique jewelry, it's my family's story. It's the only thing left of 5 generations of women who worked too hard, loved too fiercely, and were never handed anything. And if you believe in legacy, in keeping the past alive for the future, then I need your help. Someone clapped, quietly. Then someone else joined. The auctioneer cleared his throat, tapping the microphone. Lot number 77, Victorian brooch. Starting bid, $2,500. My phone buzzed. A notification. Then another. 500 pledged, Paige texted. Now 800. You hit a retweet vein. Do I hear 2,500? A man in the corner raised his number. Do I hear 26? I raised my hand. The man looked at me. Frowned. 2,700. 28. It rose like a tide. I held my breath. I stared at the glass box like it was oxygen. At 3,500, I almost caved. At 42, I almost ran. Then I got another text. You're covered, Paige wrote. Someone just donated $2,000 and said, for my grandma who never got hers back. Going once, said the auctioneer. Going twice. 4,600, I said. Sold! To the young lady with the live camera feed. My legs gave out. I barely remember the paperwork. Or the drive home. Or the look on my mother's face when I told her what I'd done. But I remember the moment I placed that brooch, cleaned, framed, loved, on a velvet pillow in the window of the little orphanage across town. They didn't have much. But now they had legacy. And the next girl who wore it? She'd have 5 generations whispering, "You are more than you were given." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Tomorrow's light brought a crisp hush across the orphanage courtyard, a pale sunrise sliding under the tall windows and painting dust motes in the air like tiny galaxies. I lingered just outside the front door, staring at the velvet pillow under the display case, as though I might wake it from a dream. Every morning I told myself we'd start ceremonially, a quiet breakfast of porridge and honey, a reading of letters from my great-grandmother's collection, and then, only then, would we touch the brooch. Inside, the children stirred. I could hear soft footsteps, a chair scraping against the linoleum floor, and the low murmur of Ms. Langley, the matron, counting heads before the day began. They called me Alara now, not Miss nor the benefactor. Somehow they sensed I was part of their family's story already. I pressed my palm to the cool glass. The brooch was more than a piece of metal and gemstones. It was a memory capsule. I inhaled, envisioning the woman who'd first worn it. I felt her hand over my grandfather's arm as they danced, felt the hush of the chapel when they exchanged vows, heard the crackle of the radio on the night my mother was born, her first breath weaving into the night air like a promise. Stepping back, I raised my phone. Live again, I thought, and then shook my head. Not today. Today was for them. The door opened. A small boy with a mop of dark hair and a crooked grin poked his head out. Is that the story, lady? Good morning, Jonah. He slipped past me, the sound of his sneakers echoing. Story, lady. Come on, it's time for breakfast. I smiled and followed, the pillowcase of feathers in my pocket, an old gift from my grandmother I carried on days when courage felt thin. In the dining hall, the tables were set with mismatched chairs and brightly colored plates. The children filed in, shy twins who never spoke above a whisper, a bold girl named Marisol who loved the number 3, and 2-year-old Teddy, whose legs were too short for the bench but who insisted on sitting anyway. I poured milk into bowls, and Ms. Langley turned to me. "They're all waiting for the reading, Alara." I nodded, clearing my throat. "Okay, everyone." Today's reading is a letter from my great-grandmother, Clara Thornton. Heads popped up. I unfolded the thin paper, its edges frayed like an old map whose roads had seen too many travelers. I read, "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then I hope you have Jill by your side, just as I did on a summer's eve when the fireflies danced like floating stars. Remember, love is inherited, not just earned. Carry our stories across oceans and into tomorrow. Love, Clara." I looked up. Marisol's eyes were wide. Jonah's mouth was open in a perfect O. Even Teddy had stopped his spoon midair. "That star..." "Clara was never afraid of the dark because she carried her own light," I said. "And that's what this brooch is, in a way." The hush in the room felt sacred. Then Ms. Langley placed a small velvet box in front of the pillow. "Alara, would you show them?" My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. The brooch lay there, opal catching the morning sun. It glowed. Marisol asked, "What's this for?" "It's to remind you," I told her, "that you belong to a long line of storytellers and fighters and dreamers." They passed it around in silence, each child holding it as if it were breathing. When it reached Marisol, she whispered, "I'll tell my story." And I realized, the gift was not ending with me, it was beginning again. The next days blurred into lessons and laughter. I taught them the basic history of the brooch, Victorian era, my great-great-grandmother's engagement piece. We researched on old laptops, printed black and white photos, and glued them to poster board. We listened to jazz records because Clara loved the saxophone. I introduced them to my grandmother's recipes, buttery scones and lavender tea cakes that filled the hallway with a scent of memory. One afternoon, a letter arrived for the orphanage. It was postmarked Bristol, England. The cursive handwriting reminded me of my grandmother's. We gathered in the rec room. "To the children of Grace House. I am Emma Thornton, daughter of the woman who first wore the brooch you now protect. I learned of its journey to your care, and wept tears of pride and relief. Know that our family stands with you, always. Enclosed is a small parcel. Please open together. With gratitude, Emma." A collective gasp. Jonah tore the envelope. Inside was a faded photograph of a woman in a lace dress, her hair piled high, the brooch pinned at her throat, and a silver locket etched with the name Grace. I held it and felt the cool metal hum beneath my palm. Without warning, the front door swung open. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped into the sunlight. He looked older than his photo, maybe late 60s, and his eyes were soft, curious. "Emma?" I swallowed. "Yes?" He gave a nod. "I'm looking for the Thornton heirloom, but I see it's already under better guardianship than I ever could have imagined." Gasps filled the room. The children clustered around him, eyes alight. He bent down to Marisol. "Will you tell me about the brooch?" She looked to me, then back to him. "It's our light. It's our story." He smiled, tears glistening. "Then I know you'll keep it safe. May I speak with Alara Quinn?" A new chapter was beginning, one I hadn't anticipated. My heart hammered. For the first time, this story felt bigger than the orphanage, bigger than my family, bigger than me. And as I led him to the small library, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone out there was about to challenge everything we'd built here. The man who entered Grace House that afternoon wore his age-like armor, brushed silver hair, weathered knuckles, a navy wool coat, just a little too fine for someone who claimed to have no ties to the brooch. But there was no mistaking the way his eyes locked onto it through the glass. He didn't blink, didn't speak, just stood there like a soldier remembering a fallen comrade. I watched him from the hall, one hand on the doorknob of the library, where I'd promised the children we'd set up a memory wall. He didn't notice me right away. When he finally did, his gaze softened. "You must be Alara Quinn." His voice was deep and rough, like it had once been smooth, but too many winters had passed through it. "I am," I said. "And you are?" "Thatcher Rowe. I was a historian at the Royal Society. Your great-grandmother, Clara, corresponded with us for nearly 30 years. We have her letters archived. We didn't know the brooch had been lost." I took a step closer. "It wasn't lost, it was sold." His jaw tensed. "That explains the silence. We tried to reach out after her passing. We didn't know the family had let go of the house." "Some of us didn't have a choice," I said more bitterly than I intended. He nodded, as if the weight of that didn't surprise him. "May I?" He gestured to the brooch. I hesitated, then opened the case. He didn't touch it, just leaned forward and inhaled softly, like the smell of old perfume might still linger on the opal. "I've studied hundreds of Victorian brooches," he said quietly, "but this one's story isn't in any museum catalog. It's in the lives of the women who wore it. I came to offer, not a transaction, but an invitation." My heartbeat ticked up. "Go on." "There's a historical restoration fund in Cornwall. We're opening a gallery devoted to heirloom narratives, items with soul, with voice, with a human cost and heritage. We want to feature this brooch and its journey, from the parlor of Thornton Estate to wherever it goes next. We'd catalog the oral histories, include the children's artwork. It'd travel for 2 years. France, Italy, Canada." I blinked. "You want to take it?" "Not take," he corrected gently. "Borrow. Only with your consent. We'd include Grace House as a permanent named sponsor. The proceeds from exhibition would go to your programs here." I sat down before I realized I was about to fall. "You're saying this could help us?" He nodded. "And the kids would be part of it? Their drawings, their stories?" "The centerpiece," he said. "But only if you're comfortable. I didn't come to pressure you, only to ask." My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. "Paige! Again, I let it go. Can I sleep on it?" He smiled. "It would be an honor." That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind rattled the shutters, and I lay in my tiny loft above the orphanage kitchen, watching headlights slide along the ceiling. I thought about what it meant, to let go of the brooch, even temporarily, to trust that someone else could carry it safely across oceans. I thought of Clara's voice in her letters, her instructions to carry the legacy. Was this carrying it? Or surrendering it? At 3:12 a.m. I sat up, wrapped myself in a quilt, and padded down the stairs. The hallways creaked like they always did. I peeked into the common room. There, under the soft glow of the hallway light, was Marisol, sitting cross-legged in front of the display case. "Couldn't sleep either?" I asked softly. She nodded. "I was thinking about if we let it go, would it remember us?" My throat tightened. I walked over and knelt beside her. "I think that's the thing," I whispered. "It remembers everything. That's what makes it powerful. It carries us with it." She tilted her head. "Then maybe we should let other people see it. If it remembers us, then we'll be everywhere." I hugged her. "That's beautiful. You're beautiful." The next morning, I called Thatcher Rowe. By lunch, he was back with contracts and a small velvet-lined transport box. I signed the paperwork in front of the kids, letting them decorate the case with tiny heart stickers and a glitter pen. "Bon voyage, little legacy," Jonah whispered. The next 2 months were a blur. The exhibition's opening night in Paris was live-streamed. They played a short video of the children's voices talking about what the brooch meant to them. "It's the thing that says we belong. It keeps secrets from the past. It's like having a grandma that you can wear." I watched from a projector in the orphanage dining room, surrounded by bowls of popcorn and tearful laughter. Then came the email. The exhibition had generated $74,000 in donations for Grace House. 74,000. We replaced the leaking roof, bought new beds, installed a computer lab, and then, because they deserved it, we rented a bus and took the kids to the seaside for the first time in their lives. The brooch returned just before winter. It came nestled in silk and stories, accompanied by letters from museum goers around the world. One read, "I never knew a piece of jewelry could change how I saw family. Thank you for sharing her. Another, I lost my grandmother's ring in a move. Seeing this reminded me of the love that still lingers. We made a scrapbook, thick and full of every page they sent us. And then came the press request. BBC's Heirlooms, the stories they tell. They wanted to feature Grace House. Interview the children, interview me. The thought terrified me. But they came. And they listened. When the segment aired, I got an email from a lawyer in Manchester. Ms. Quinn, we represent the estate of Helena Prescott. Our client, deceased, was a private patron of community heritage projects. Before her passing, she earmarked a substantial bequest for individuals preserving family legacies. Your story was the final inspiration. We'd like to schedule a transfer of funds. I thought it was a scam. It wasn't. 1 week later, Grace House received a donation of $250,000. And with it, the offer to purchase the building we'd been renting for 15 years. I sat on the roof that night, alone under a bowl of stars, and cried into the cold wind. The brooch hadn't saved us. It had reminded the world we were worth saving. But not everyone was happy. A knock on the door 3 weeks later revealed a woman with sharp lipstick, a clipboard, and an attitude I recognized instantly. My mother. We need to talk, she said. And, just like that, the old battle stirred again. She stood in the entryway like she owned the place, coat perfectly pressed, heels echoing on the tile floor, and judgment radiating off her like perfume. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. The last time, she'd left a voicemail saying she hoped I'd, quote, find a path more in line with my potential. Apparently, turning a forgotten heirloom into a $250,000 catalyst for an orphanage still didn't qualify. Mother, I said, bracing myself. Ilara. She stepped inside and surveyed the hallway like she was inspecting a hotel she might one day sue. Her gaze paused on the new mural the kids had painted, a swirl of rainbows and names, and then flicked back to me. You've been busy. I nodded. We had to renovate. After the exhibition and donation, we had the funds. We bought the building. Her lips pursed. Yes, I saw the segment. I didn't realize you'd chosen to use the brooch that way. I didn't choose. I listened. To who? I gestured toward the kitchen, where laughter echoed. Jonah was trying to convince Marisol that pancakes were better without syrup. Teddy had declared he would only eat if someone sang to him. She followed me in, reluctantly. The children stared. I knelt beside them. Everyone, this is my mother. They murmured soft hellos. One child waved. She offered a tight smile. Pleasure to meet you. Back in the office, she settled into the one leather chair as though she'd brought it herself. I stayed standing. So, I asked, what's this really about? She opened her folder. Inside was a legal envelope. The estate lawyers contacted me. Apparently, the trust tied to your grandmother's legacy, the one I was excluded from, has a clause triggered by public impact. They saw the media coverage. The board determined that since your actions increased the value of the estate's social capital, you may now be entitled to the family matching provision. I blinked. In English? You have a right to a substantial payout. Silence. She sipped her tea. Roughly $310,000, after taxes. I sank onto the edge of the desk. The number didn't feel real. There's a catch, isn't there? She nodded. You must claim it as a Thornton heir. That means signing acknowledgement of family line. And your actions. All of them, from the brooch acquisition to the broadcast, will be under formal review. They want to own the narrative. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I stood again. And what do you want, Mother? She looked at me for a long time. Her eyes softened for just a breath. I want you to come home. I want this to stop being a war. I didn't know what to say. For the first time, she didn't sound cruel. She sounded tired. That night, I couldn't sleep. Again, I reread Clara's letters. The ink had faded, but the spirit burned bright. Asterix. It's not what we pass down that defines us. It's what we choose to share. I called Paige. She picked up instantly. What do you want to do? She asked. I want to keep the orphanage running. I want the kids to have futures. But I don't want to be rewritten. Then don't sign anything without leverage. Make them include your version in the record. Protect the story. I hung up, heart pounding. The next week blurred into phone calls, lawyer meetings, and letters. The board wanted a sanitized version of the brooch story. They wanted to remove mention of the live stream, the donations, the orphanage. Too controversial, they said, too emotionally volatile. I refused. Until one of them, an older woman named Beatrice, called me privately. "Miss Quinn," she said, "I wore the brooch once. Your grandmother let me hold it when we were girls. You're right to protect it." That changed everything. The board met again. This time, they agreed to a public-facing archive. Video interviews, letters, children's artwork, and a full account of the brooch's journey. In exchange, I'd accept the inheritance. I said yes. With the funds, we hired 2 new teachers. We bought art supplies and musical instruments. We even started a scholarship fund for when the children aged out of the system. Then came the knock on the door. A teenager, maybe 15, stood on the steps, shivering, holding a plastic grocery bag. "I heard about this place," she said. "Is it true that you let people start over?" I nodded. "Yes, come in." Her name was Sky. She'd run from a foster home. Her record said disruptive. Her eyes said bruised. She didn't speak for 2 days. Then, one night, she pointed to the brooch. "I used to have something like that. A ring. My mom's. They sold it." "Do you want to write about it?" I asked. She shook her head, then paused. "Maybe, later." We waited. 1 week. 2. Slowly, she joined the others. She painted. She read out loud. One afternoon, I found her sleeping beside the case, one hand resting on the velvet. When I told her about Clara, she whispered, "Maybe I'll be the first in my line." A month later, Thatcher Rowe returned. He had another offer, the Smithsonian. They want the brooch for a special exhibit, Women of Legacy, just for a month. In D.C., it'll be returned by winter. I turned to the children. Jonah nodded. Marisol said, "Only if it comes back." It went. Sky made a video for the exhibit. She spoke into the camera, voice steady. "This isn't a fairy tale brooch. It's not magic. It's memory. It's the kind of thing that tells the world, I was here, we mattered." It aired on opening night. The audience gave a standing ovation. 3 days later, a woman named Angela called. She'd seen the exhibit. She ran a nonprofit for displaced girls. She offered to fund an expansion. 6 months later, Grace House East opened in Manchester. Sky painted the sign. The brooch came home in December, wrapped in silk, with new letters, new stories, a new scratch on the back. A museum worker had accidentally dropped it. I held it and smiled. "Even legacies get dented," I whispered. And that's when I knew. This story wasn't about ownership, it was about stewardship. I wasn't just preserving history anymore. I was building it. Spring arrived with a quiet ferocity. Buds on the trees outside Grace House opened like secrets finally ready to be told. The children shed their coats, the air warmed, and the brooch, freshly returned from Washington, D.C., rested in its case again, now joined by a rotating display of mementos from the girls and boys who had made Grace House a home. We had restructured the main room into what we called the Living Legacy Gallery. One wall was dedicated to the timeline of the brooch's journey. Another held portraits. The black and white photo of Clara in her wedding dress, a painting of Grace House by Marisol, and Sky's mural depicting the brooch flying across a map of the world with glowing strings tied to hearts below it. I stood in the middle of it all, arms crossed, watching as 2 volunteers from the Smithsonian carefully installed a final placard. "Memory isn't what we keep, it's what we share." They left a donation and their thanks. We served them tea and sent them on their way with a copy of the Grace House anthology, now in its 3rd edition. The brooch sat like a quiet witness. I never touched it without asking. That was something we'd all agreed on. Whoever opened the case, whether child or adult, had to be willing to tell a story. Not always big, not always sad, but always honest. That rule, though sacred, was about to be tested in a way none of us were prepared for. One Friday afternoon, as we wrapped up an art session with the younger children, the doorbell rang. Ms. Langley answered, then called for me. Standing in the foyer was a woman with sandy blonde hair, pinched shoulders, and a threadbare satchel. She clutched it like a life raft. "You're Lara?" I nodded. "Yes, can I help you?" She looked past me, saw the gallery, and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. I think I'm your cousin." Her name was Meredith. Her mother, Rachel, was my grandmother Clara's estranged younger sister, someone I had only heard about in whispers and footnotes. Meredith hadn't grown up knowing much about our family. Her mother had left at 17, had never worn the brooch, had never been mentioned in holiday letters. "I only found out about you when the Smithsonian exhibit went viral," she said, nursing tea at our long communal table. "I recognized the name. I dug up some of Mom's things. There were letters." She reached into her bag and unfolded papers so brittle they looked like they might disintegrate. I read them. Slowly. My grandmother had written to Rachel, year after year, pleading for her to come back, forgiving her, updating her on family news, sending photos. "She never replied," Meredith whispered, "but she kept them, every one." I swallowed hard. She must have cared. "I think she did," Meredith said, "but she didn't know how to face it. She pulled out something wrapped in a scarf, and she left this for me, said I'd know what to do with it. I opened it. Another brooch. Similar filigree, same gold. No opal, but a piece of sea glass smoothed into the same oval shape. I held it to the light. The resemblance was uncanny. "I think she made it herself," Meredith said. We sat in silence. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Would you like to tell her story?" Meredith nodded. Her voice cracked as she said, "Yes." That week, we added a new frame to the gallery, Rachel's sea brooch. The children stared at it like it was a puzzle piece suddenly found. Sky said, "It's like a sister to the real one." "No," Marisol corrected, "it is real. It just never got to be heard before." Quote, "And then Jonah whispered, 'There's more than one way to be part of a family.'" Yes, exactly that. We hosted a new event, Silent Stories. Children and guests could come view both brooches and leave a written note about someone they'd lost, someone they never got to meet, or someone who'd never been allowed to speak. The jar filled fast. One note said, "For my mom who wasn't allowed to go to college, I'm going for both of us." Another, "For my sister, who was too loud for our house, but just loud enough for the world." And another, in Marisol's unmistakable handwriting, "For my real mom, even if I don't know your name." The brooch had become more than an heirloom. It was a confessional, a sanctuary, a revolution. Porkin Sanjo. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. In late April, an envelope arrived, thick, official, and gold embossed. It was an invitation. The Crown Restoration Council cordially invites Miss Alara Quinn to speak at the International Heritage Preservation Summit in Vienna. Featured topic: the brooch that built a home. I dropped the envelope. Vienna. Me. It took weeks to prepare. Ms. Langley covered for me. The kids helped pick my outfit. Paige edited my speech. Sky drew an illustration of the brooch and slipped it into my suitcase. "In case you forget who you are," she said. The summit was surreal. Stately buildings, polished wood stages, journalists with recorders, academics with precise nods. And there I was, trembling, hard-hammering. I told them everything. Not just about Clara, but about Meredith, Rachel, the children, Grace House. I ended with this. You don't have to inherit something to carry it forward. You don't need blood to be bonded. Sometimes, the most powerful legacy is what we choose to give away. There was silence. Then a standing ovation. Back at Grace House, I was greeted with banners drawn in crayon, a cake from Ms. Langley, and a round of off-key singing that made me laugh so hard I cried. Sky handed me a lanyard. "What's this?" "Your title," she said. In Sharpie it read, Chief Story Guardian. I wore it for the rest of the week. But something was coming. I felt it. Like the air before a storm. The brooch started fogging up in its case more often. Humidity, maybe, but it felt symbolic. Then Paige called. "You've got mail," she said. "And it's weird." She forwarded a scanned letter. To Miss Quinn, "We are the descendants of Mrs. Evelyn Portwood, the original maker of the opal brooch you claim as your family heirloom. We have reviewed the exhibition and public broadcasts. We intend to challenge the ownership and narrative rights. Please contact our counsel at..." I dropped the phone. The next chapter had arrived, and it wanted everything back. The cease and desist letter sat on my desk like a ticking bomb. It wasn't dramatic in appearance, just crisp linen paper and a bold serif letterhead, but its words carried a blade. The Portwoods weren't bluffing. They claimed proprietary rights to the brooch's design, historical attribution, and all associated profits, including emotional capital leveraged through digital storytelling. They'd hired a high-profile London law firm. I reread the sentence that made my stomach turn. Asterisk, our clients reserve the right to pursue civil action should the brooch remain misrepresented in public exhibitions, publications, or fundraising narratives. Misrepresented, that single word burned. I wasn't just scared, I was furious. "They're trying to erase her," I told Paige over the phone, pacing my office like a caged animal. "All of them, Clara, Rachel, Meredith, even the kids, they think they can claim a memory." "They're testing you," Paige said calmly. "They're rich. They expect you to fold. But you have something they don't." "What?" "A community, a paper trail, and a world that already loves your version." I swallowed. "So what do I do?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "You tell your story louder, and you don't flinch." We gathered in the living room that night. Staff, children, volunteers, Meredith. I read the letter aloud. When I finished, the room fell silent. "They want us to take it down?" Marisol asked. "The brooch?" "Not just that," I said. "They want to rewrite who it belonged to." Jonah's face turned red. "But it belongs to us now. It remembers us." Sky stood. She held out a notebook. "Then we write back, all of us." The next morning we launched the Brooch Belongs to U.S. TISEC campaign. Every child wrote a letter. Sky started it. You can't own a story once it's been shared. You can't take back something that's already been loved by so many. We posted videos, photos, artwork, testimonials. Within 48 hours, the hashtag the brooch belongs to us was trending. Former foster children shared what the story had meant to them. Museum goers posted selfies with the exhibit. Teachers used the brooch as a metaphor in classrooms. Then, the real breakthrough. A historian from Oxford named Dr. Isla Vane published an open letter. She had studied both the Thornton family and the Portwoods. Her conclusion? The Portwoods' claim hinges not on documented lineage, but on a misinterpreted workshop registry. The brooch design may have emerged from Evelyn Portwood's studio, but the item itself passed legally and traceably through 6 generations of Thornton women. The cultural legacy belongs to Grace House. The letter went viral. The Portwoods backed down. Sort of. They issued a public statement withdrawing legal threats but declined to, quote, validate the emotional mythology surrounding the brooch's current narrative. Which, in plain English, meant, fine, keep it, but we're not happy. I could live with that. We kept the letter from Dr. Vane framed beside the display case. Below it, we added a new placard, written by Jonah. Asterisk legacy isn't given, it's made, with every voice that refuses to be quiet. In May, something unexpected happened. I was called to City Hall. When I arrived, I was ushered into a meeting room where 3 council members waited. One of them, a soft-spoken woman with wire-rimmed glasses, smiled and slid a folder across the table. We've reviewed your impact reports, and we'd like to nominate you for the city's Civic Torch Award. I blinked. What's that? It's given to individuals who illuminate a path others didn't know they could follow. The ceremony would be televised. I thought of Clara, of her handwriting, of her hope. I said yes. The award night was surreal. I wore a navy dress Sky helped pick out. Meredith curled my hair. Marisol dabbed glitter on my collarbone and whispered, "You're already famous to us." The mayor read a citation that included every name from Grace House, even Teddy's. When I accepted the award, I said this: "A legacy is not an object, it's a promise, and here's mine. We will not be forgotten, not the ones who were lost, not the ones who were loud, not the ones who never got to speak. We're still here, and our stories still matter." Standing ovation. And back home, a hand-drawn banner across the orphanage gate. "Welcome home, torchbearer." We expanded again that summer. A second home was purchased in Liverpool, modeled after Grace House. Meredith offered to run it. She'd found her calling, she said, in listening to forgotten voices. We renamed the project the Brooch Foundation. Our mission: preserve legacy, protect stories, provide sanctuary. The brooch itself would stay in Grace House, but high-resolution replicas, with QR codes linking to audio stories, were created and distributed to every new location. Each child would touch the legacy. Each child would add to it. Then, in July, a delivery arrived. No return address, just a padded box and a note. Asterisk. Some things shouldn't be hidden forever. She wanted you to have it. MP. Inside was a second brooch. Real opal, real gold. Stamped on the back, times EP 1872. It was Evelyn Portwood's original prototype. My breath caught. A gift. From someone who once tried to erase us. We placed it beside Clara's brooch, side by side, no longer in conflict, but in conversation. A new placard. Asterisk, truth doesn't compete, it expands. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the gallery. I looked at the twin brooches, and I whispered, "Thank you for finding your way home." Because that's what legacy does. It returns, it repairs, and it radiates. The two brooches, Clara's and Evelyn's, sat side by side beneath the gallery light, catching the warm glow of dusk like twin heartbeats pressed beneath silk. There was no velvet case that could contain the weight of their stories anymore, so we stopped trying. Instead, we reimagined the gallery entirely. We called it Time My Legacy Circle. At the center stood a round table, oak and weathered, salvaged from the original Thornton Estates attic and shipped back to Grace House after a local antique dealer tracked it down through one of our donors. Around it, 12 chairs, each hand-painted by one of the children, with a brass plaque reading a single word: belonging. Visitors were invited to sit, to speak, to share. There were no formal presentations, no velvet ropes, just stories. The first to test it was Jonah. He sat one morning just after breakfast and whispered, "When my mom left, she didn't take her necklace. I used to hold it every night so I wouldn't forget her. Now I don't need to. I have this place." He touched the wood. "Now I remember her for what she gave me, not what she didn't." A journalist from Berlin came next. She sat at the table, ran a finger along the edge, and said simply, "My grandmother was never allowed to tell her story. I think she would have liked it here." We invited her to stay for dinner. She returned a month later with a suitcase full of books and a grant application for a documentary series. That summer, we hosted Grace House's first ever Legacy Festival. A weekend of open doors, performances, food stalls, history talks, storytelling circles, and a traveling art exhibit featuring creations from the children. The brooches remained at the center of it all, no longer relics, but catalysts. Over 1,000 people attended. Children from 6 different foster homes met one another for the first time. They traded sketches and stories, laughed over fried bread, braided hair. A boy from Liverpool wrote a poem on the spot. Asterisk. We are the ribbon that ties past to present. We are the fire passed hand to hand. We are the story not told in silence. We are the ones who understand. That night, as the stars broke over the fields behind Grace House, I found myself standing alone by the garden wall, Paige joined me, wineglass in hand. You know, she said, bumping my shoulder gently, when you told me you were going to fight an auction house and rescue a brooch with a live stream and a prayer, I thought you'd lost your mind. You weren't wrong, but you also built something I didn't think was possible. I turned to look at her. I didn't build it, I said. I just listened when it started to speak. But even miracles attract shadows. 2 weeks later, I received a letter. No envelope, no return address. Just a single page, typed, asterisk. You think you're helping them, but you're building an illusion. Love isn't legacy. Trauma doesn't make you wise. You're dressing up abandonment in heirloom lace. And eventually, the seams will split. No signature. I read it 3 times. Then I set it down. And I wrote one back. Asterisk. Sometimes the seams are where the light gets in. I didn't send it. I pinned it to the gallery wall. Sky read it aloud the next morning. She smiled. And then she wrote her own note beside it. Asterisk, dear whoever you are, you should try sitting with us before you speak for us. In September, we received a formal invitation from the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. They wanted to recognize Grace House as a living cultural archive. We were stunned. A small ceremony was planned. The brooches would be officially registered as protected cultural items, not because they were old, but because they had changed the lives of those who held them. The day before the ceremony, a woman arrived. She was in her late 50s, hair silver-streaked, scarf billowing as she stepped from a cab. She looked vaguely familiar. I'm looking for Clara's granddaughter, she said. I stepped forward. That's me. Then I believe you're holding something that once belonged to my sister. My breath caught. She extended a hand. My name is Florence Portwood, Evelyn's daughter. We sat on the back porch for 3 hours. She told me how her mother had passed in near obscurity, how Evelyn had never felt recognized for her work, how she had tried, through her will, to reach out, how the legal threats from her descendants had left her heartbroken. That brooch, Florence said, her voice trembling, was her masterpiece, not because of the design, but because she gave it freely to a girl who wore it into generations. That was her real art, the handing down. I told her everything. She listened, tears on her cheeks. When I finished, she stood. May I sit at the table? Of course. She placed her hands flat on the wood. Then let this be my story. I forgive them. And I am proud of her. We added her quote to the gallery. The UNESCO ceremony was held on a golden October afternoon. Delegates from 12 countries arrived. Clara's brooch was set in a new display beside Evelyn's, under a banner that read, Time's asterisk memory is not a museum. It is a movement. Asterisk Noxt framed a Marisol sang. Jonah read his poem. Sky unveiled her new sculpture, twin wings woven from melted spoons and brass wire, each feather etched with a child's name. When I stepped up to speak, I held nothing in my hands. Just my voice. We didn't set out to create a legacy. We set out to stop one from disappearing. This brooch was never about gold or opal. It was about stories, about dignity, about refusing to be erased. So many of us come from silence. But we are not silent anymore. Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. I saw Florence weeping. I saw Sky beaming. And I felt something settle inside me. Not pride. Peace. Later that night, under the stars, Paige found me again. You're glowing, she said. I'm exhausted. Same thing, apparently. We laughed. Then she said, You know there's no going back, right? This is who you are now. I know. Chief Story Guardian. Bearer of memory. Breaker of silence. Builder of home. I looked at the brooch through the window. It glimmered. It endured. And tomorrow, we'd begin again. Because the story was still unfolding. Because the legacy wasn't done. Winter came early that year, like an old friend too eager to visit. The air turned brittle before November, and a quiet snow began to dress the rooftops of Grace House like a lace veil over everything we'd built. The garden froze in delicate sculpture, and the mural outside crackled faintly in the morning sun. Inside, the warmth from the hearths hummed low, and laughter bounced down the halls like a familiar song. But something had shifted. It wasn't bad, not exactly, just different. The UNESCO recognition changed more than our archives. It brought waves of visitors, requests, interviews. Busloads of schoolchildren came through daily, their tiny fingers pressed against the glass, eyes wide as they stared at the twin brooches. Teachers whispered, "Look, this is what memory looks like." But with the crowds came pressure. There were sponsorship offers, endowment proposals, TV producers looking to option the story. One morning I found a note in my inbox from a streaming giant. Asterisk, we see potential for an international docuseries, possibly a dramatization. We would love your cooperation, Alara. The narrative of legacy and healing is universally resonant. Are you open to licensing the rights to the story and characters? Nos. Problet plain. Molaf Macaline res. Molaf Macaline res. Baf Macaline res. Problet plain Bolaf Macal. That night I found Sky sitting on the library steps, staring out the window at the frost-covered lawn. "They're turning it into a show," she said, not looking at me. "They're trying. But it's not a story, it's us." I sat beside her. "I know. That's why we protect it. We don't sell it. Not unless it helps. Not unless we're the ones telling it." She nodded. Then, after a long pause, "Promise me they won't make me into a plot device." "Never." We sat in silence for a long time. The kind of silence that feels like a contract. Over the next few weeks, we made a difficult decision. We formed an internal storytelling council made up of current residents, alumni, volunteers, and local historians. Every media inquiry would go through them. Every depiction of the brooch would be reviewed by the people who had lived the legacy. We called it the Voice Committee. Their first vote: no dramatizations. Only documentary, only truth. On the first snow day of December, we held a special event in the Legacy Circle. We invited past residents to return. Some hadn't set foot in Grace House for years. Now they stood in the hallways, stunned by what they saw. "You painted this?" one asked, tracing a child's mural. "It was blank when I lived here," said another. A woman named Jaya, now a social worker, stood before the brooches and whispered, "I used to think the only thing that lasted was loss. I was wrong." She wrote that on a card. We added it to the display. Then came the moment that changed everything. A child named Ava, 7 years old, eyes wide with old sadness, arrived one night wrapped in a jacket 2 sizes too big. She didn't speak. Didn't eat much. But every morning, she'd sit cross-legged in front of the brooches, lips moving silently like she was speaking to them. Ms. Langley told me she's remembering something, or maybe trying to forget. One day, I knelt beside her. "What do you see when you look at them, Ava?" She stared straight ahead, then whispered, "I see someone holding me, in the dark, saying, 'Don't forget who you are.'" That night, I cried into my pillow. Because sometimes, legacy doesn't wait for the future. It shows up in the arms of a girl who's still learning how to speak. As the end of the year approached, our mailbox overflowed with letters. People from Japan, Brazil, South Africa, Australia, all saying the same thing. Asterisk. Thank you for reminding us that stories belong to everyone. One child from New Delhi wrote, Asterisk. I made a paper brooch in art class. It's not real gold, but it carries real love. On New Year's Eve, we hosted the first annual Legacy Light Vigil. Each child held a small lantern, handmade and glowing with their favorite quote or drawing from the year. We stood in the courtyard, breath visible, snow beneath our boots, stars like frozen petals above. Sky red from the front steps. This year, we remembered what was almost forgotten. We listened to voices once silenced. We passed on a legacy that cannot be bought. And we promised to keep the light going. They raised their lanterns, and together we whispered, "We remember." At midnight, while the rest of the town cheered and celebrated, I stood alone in the gallery. The brooches caught the firelight like tiny galaxies, and I whispered into the silence, "Thank you for choosing me, for choosing us." Behind me, Sky spoke. "You think it chose you?" I turned. She stepped into the room, still holding her lantern. "I think you were the brooch all along." And for once, I had no words. The next morning, the snow melted. And spring, impossibly early, knocked at our door. Spring, as it turned out, hadn't arrived too early. It had simply been waiting for us to catch up. The frost ebbed back in late January, weeks before the calendar said it should. The gardens, long dormant, began to push green shoots through soil we hadn't even tilled yet. Robins returned, confused but insistent, pecking at breadcrumbs left by a child named Leo, who'd taken it upon himself to start a, quote, bird breakfast club. Inside Gray's house, change was coming too. Not just the kind we could see, the new greenhouse construction underway behind the dorms, or the updated computer lab, but something else. Something under the skin of the place. A deeper breath. A steadier pulse. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were becoming something permanent. "You're not just a sanctuary now," Paige told me over lunch one afternoon. "You're a cultural institution." I blinked. That sounds so pretentious. It's accurate. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were mock-ups for a proposed exhibit expansion. Not just the brooches now, but also pieces contributed by other communities. A quilt from a Cherokee boarding school survivor. A diary from a war refugee. An heirloom comb carried through the middle passage. "You want to make the brooches part of something bigger?" I asked. She nodded. "Something global. A tapestry of lost and found legacies." I closed the folder. We'd need space. We'd need a second gallery. We'd need a whole new building. Glurvband. We named the initiative Smoltiza Chineriyo, Echo House, a sister site, built on the same land, designed as a living archive of passed-down memory. Not curated for display, but for conversation. We reached out to communities across the world. Asked one question, what did they leave you, and what did you keep? Submissions poured in. A set of worry beads from Cyprus. A pair of baby shoes wrapped in resistance leaflets from Ukraine. A wooden spoon carved by a father who'd fled civil war in Sudan. Each item came with a letter. Each letter with a voice. And each voice became part of Echo House. But success always makes noise. And noise attracts critics. The local council began to ask questions about permits. A newspaper ran an opinion piece titled Asterisk, Legacy or Spectacle? Are we romanticizing trauma? Asterisk. A handful of residents from the wealthier side of town filed a petition questioning whether Echo House's unfiltered emotional programming was suitable for children. I read their words aloud to the children during one of our evening circles. They listened. Then Sky stood. You know what's unsuitable for children? Pretending they don't exist until they're broken enough to bury. No one said anything after that. But the next day, someone left a bouquet of yellow tulips and a handwritten note on the gallery steps. Asterisk. Thank you for not letting them stay invisible. In March, something extraordinary happened. A donor, anonymous, gifted us an adjoining property. A dilapidated inn that had once served travelers during the post-war boom. With work, it could be restored into Echo House. We held a vote. The children, the staff, the board. Unanimous. We broke ground that April. The build wasn't smooth. We faced delays, disputes over zoning, mold in the basement. But somehow, every time something went wrong, someone stepped in. A retired architect donated blueprints. A former contractor offered his time. Local high schoolers painted murals. And the brooches? They stayed in their case, glinting like twin flames, watching. Waiting. As Echo House neared completion, Ava, who now spoke often and clearly, approached me with a shoebox. Inside was a small, rusted ring. My mom wore this when she had good days, when she remembered my name. I took it gently. Do you want to add it to the new gallery? Ava shook her head. I want to keep it, but I want you to tell people about it. About how some legacies are painful and beautiful at the same time. I promised her I would. Echo House opened on June 3rd. The sun shone. The air smelled like hope and paint. We cut the ribbon with a pair of antique tailor's scissors, gifted from a seamstress in Istanbul. The first exhibit was titled, Held in the Palm, Objects They Couldn't Take Back. The brooches were there, but off-center. Beside them sat a worn music box, a battered prayer rug, a patchwork scarf, and Ava's story, printed in careful script and framed. Not everything that hurts is meant to be hidden, it read. Some things hurt because they mattered. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from a girl named Mina in Tehran. Asterisk. I saw your story online. My grandmother had a brooch like that. She buried it when the soldiers came. Now I wear it. It reminds me I still belong to something. We added her quote to the front wall. Asterisk, I still belong. And just like that, Echo House had a heartbeat of its own. Late one night, I walked between the two buildings. Grace House glowed soft with bedtime lamps and quiet lullabies. Echo House shimmered with the hum of remembered names. The path between them, lined with lanterns, felt like a bridge over generations. And in the stillness, I finally let myself say it. You did it, Clara. We did it. It's alive. Somewhere, a wind chime rang, and I could have sworn I heard her laugh. July arrived on the heels of quiet thunder, the kind that never quite breaks open the sky but rumbles deep enough to shift something inside you. The air was thick with growth, flowers blooming faster than we could document them, letters arriving in such volume that Ms. Langley declared a sorting day just to keep up. Grace House and Echo House breathed together now, two lungs of the same growing body. But with every expansion, there comes a reckoning. I first noticed it in myself. That old tug, the one I'd felt years ago standing on the steps of the Thornton estate, staring at a brooch under glass. That need to protect, but also to let go. The children noticed too. Are you going somewhere? Leo asked one morning, catching me staring too long at the horizon. No, I lied. But the truth was already humming in my bones. It started with a letter. This time, not from a child or historian or museum. It came from the School of Narrative Preservation in Edinburgh. They'd been following our work since the UNESCO recognition, and were offering me a year-long research fellowship to develop a global memory curriculum, something they called the Heirloom Framework. It's not just education, the letter read. It's evolution. I didn't know what to do. How do you leave the thing that made you? Paige was the first person I told. She didn't blink, just nodded slowly like she'd been waiting for me to catch up. You have to go. But the kids will thrive because of you, not in spite of your absence. I'm not sure I can. She leaned in. Alara, you're not a statue in the gallery. You're a story, and stories move. The voice committee met. We shared the letter, the opportunity, the fears. Sky stared at me, arms folded. You want to go study how legacy works? Yes. Then you'd better come back and teach us everything. Quote. They voted to approve my leave. Unanimous. Jonah even tried to start a petition to get the university to name a bench after me. The announcement was made on a bright Sunday morning. The children sat in a semicircle in the legacy circle, holding hands. I'll be gone for 1 year, I said, but this place, it's never been mine. It's always been yours. I was just the first person who heard it breathe. We cried. We laughed. They made me a crown out of macaroni and feathers and glue. Queen of Stories, it read. I wore it all day. Mayor. As I packed, I touched every room one last time. The gallery. The reading porch. The attic where Meredith had once cried in the dark after learning about Rachel. I visited the brooches, knelt beside them. "Don't miss me too much," I whispered. Ava had drawn smiley faces on the display case in washable marker. I left them there. My departure wasn't dramatic. No speeches, no music. Just the children, lined up at the gate, each handing me something. A drawing. A folded poem. A leaf. A single earring with no pair. And Sky's gift, a tiny metal brooch made from scrap wire and ribbon. "So you don't forget where the story started," she said. I held it to my chest. Never. Edinburgh was gray and ancient and stunning. The fellowship immersed me in conversations I never thought I'd have. In seminar rooms and candlelit libraries, I met archivists and artists, anthropologists and philosophers. We debated the ethics of memory, the politics of inheritance, the geometry of grief, but I carried them with me. Every child, every letter, every object. I taught a seminar called Cold Summer, the Narrative Object. I showed them Ava's ring, Leo's bird club log, Sky's sculpture. I told them how memory isn't kept, it's carried. And they listened. Back home, Paige sent updates every Friday. Sky had taken over the story chair. Jonah wrote a grant proposal, won it. Marisol hosted a spoken word night. 300 people showed up. Echo House launched a podcast. Grace House hosted its first intercontinental art exchange. I missed them so much it hurt. But it also made me proud. Because legacy, I was learning, is also about making space. Near the end of the fellowship, I was invited to present a keynote at the Global Forum on Cultural Continuity in Florence. I told them what I knew. Legacy is not preservation, it's transformation. It's the courage to let what we love evolve. Quote, and then, almost without realizing it, I said, and next month I'm going home. The audience clapped. But all I could think was, home. Grace House. The brooch. Sky. The child I used to be, and the one I was still becoming. I returned 1 year to the day. The children were taller, the walls brighter. The gallery had a new section titled, While You Were Away. Photos of Echo House milestones. Drawings. A letter from Mina in Tehran. She'd visited Grace House during a stopover and donated her brooch to the archive. They gave me a new title, Guardian Emerita. I wore it with the ribbon brooch Sky had made, and when I stood again before the twin brooches, I didn't kneel. I smiled. Hello, old friends. We're still here, and we're just getting started. Grace House had always been a place of firsts. First safe nights. First whispered confessions. First paintings hung on real walls. First stories told without interruption. But now it was something more. A place of returns. The week I came back, we didn't schedule anything. No media, no public tours, no announcements. The children insisted it has to be just us first. And so it was. A sunrise breakfast on the back lawn, waffles and tea, and way too much whipped cream. Ava brought a stack of drawings, each one detailing a moment I'd missed while away. Echo House's first snowfall, Jonah's first piano recital, Paige slipping on ice and landing in a pile of paint cans. It looked like a rainbow exploded, Ava had written in crayon. I laughed until I cried. Then Sky stood. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a velvet pouch. Inside was a pendant. Brass, simple, hand-forged. Etched with 2 words, Memory Keeper. You earned it, she said. I clasped it around my neck and promised, again, to never forget where the story started. But I hadn't returned just to relive the past. A year of study had changed me. I came back with ideas, new ways to teach, to archive, to connect. Echo House had been a spark. Now, I saw the shape of a wildfire, in the best possible way. We called it the Heirloom Network, a decentralized, child-led, global memory exchange platform. Simple, honest, powerful. Children from refugee camps in Jordan shared voice recordings with survivors in New Orleans. Foster youth in Belfast sent sketches to pen pals in Cambodia. We trained teens to be community archivists, story collectors, keepers of the torch. Jonah wrote the slogan, "Our past is portable." It stuck. Paige helped us file for foundation status. We restructured everything. Grace House became HQ, but every location had equal voice. Sky was named youth director. Marisol ran the creative programming team. Meredith oversaw outreach to care homes across Europe. The brooches remained at the heart of it all. Not artifacts. Anchors. On my first night back, I sat alone in the gallery. I noticed something new. Someone had added a quote under the twin brooches. Asterisk. What we carry does not define us. What we share does. No signature. Just truth. By August, the Heirloom Network had launched in 11 countries. We partnered with UNESCO, Amnesty, even a few quietly enthusiastic government agencies. Everyone wanted in. Legacy, after all, was suddenly a buzzword. We were careful. We never let branding override story. Every item archived was done with permission. Every child's voice retained ownership. When a major streaming platform asked again for rights to dramatize the brooch's story, we replied with a public video. Me, Sky, Paige, all of us. This isn't fiction, I said. This is family. And this time, the world backed us. In October, Echo House received its 1 millionth visitor. Her name was Hannah. She was 9. She carried a pine wood button her great-grandfather had carved during wartime. Her family had kept it wrapped in cloth for 3 generations. She pressed it into Sky's hand and said, "I think it wants to meet the brooch." And so it did. We set it gently beside Clara's brooch and Evelyn's prototype. A child's button. The same weight, somehow, as gold. In November, tragedy struck. One of our graduates, Santi, was lost in a car accident. He was 23. He had just finished his social work degree. He was weeks away from opening his own memory lab in Buenos Aires. We flew a Grace House team down to attend the memorial. We brought the brooches. Let them sit in the front pew. Let them witness the grief. And then, during the eulogy, Sky stood, her first time speaking at a public event. She held up Santi's sketchbook. "He told me once," she said, voice cracking, "that stories are how we survive the ones we lose. So if we keep telling his, he's not lost, just carried." That night, a candlelight vigil stretched down 4 city blocks. Santi's name trended in 8 countries. The next day, we received over 900 new story submissions. Santi's legacy became a wing of Echo House. The carried room, an archive of memory after loss, the quietest room, but the one with the most light. By winter, we had requests from 42 cities to start their own houses. We paused. We took a breath. We reminded ourselves, growth was never the goal. Connection was. So we began mentoring instead of replicating. Every new group trained in narrative ethics. Every brooch replica engraved with a different phrase. Asterisk, hold gently. Asterisk, listen deeply. Asterisk, ask before telling. Asterisk, memory is not a spotlight. It is a circle. Mac. Sky turned 18 in January. She gave a speech I'll never forget. I used to think I was broken. Then I met a girl who talked to jewelry and turned grief into gold. And she didn't fix me. She just let me stay. So now I stay for others. And that's what legacy is. Not staying still, just staying twith, asterisk. They gave her a standing ovation. She blushed so hard she tripped over the microphone. We laughed. We cried. We added her quote to the wall. That spring, we were contacted by a council in South Africa. A child there had been found wandering the bush after her village had been burned. She wore only one thing: a brooch. Gold, filigree, with a center of opal, identical to Clara's. I froze. They sent photos. We verified the maker's mark. Another Portwood piece. Lost. Carried. Found. We flew down. We didn't just take photos. We sat with her. Listened. Asked permission. And then, when she nodded, we placed the brooch gently into our traveling archive. She traced it once, then whispered a single word: Mama. Legacy, I realized, is not linear. It does not begin or end with us. It loops, dips, doubles back. It's the sound of laughter in a hallway you thought you'd never walk again. It's the feel of a stranger's hand that somehow feels like home. It's a brooch. It's a button. It's a word. It's a silence that listens back. And it's just getting started. There was a moment, not long after the South Africa trip, when I found myself standing alone, in the very back corner of Echo House, hands deep in a storage crate filled with donated shoes. Not brooches, not heirlooms, just shoes. Dusty, worn, scuffed in all the places that tell a story, heels worn to the left, laces frayed where fingers had tied them in a hurry. There was no inventory list for this crate, no accompanying letters, just a sticky note that read, *, they didn't have a chance to carry anything else. I sank onto the floor, shoes all around me like quiet ghosts. And I thought, this is what legacy feels like when you don't dress it up. Unvarnished, unnamed, unclaimed. But here. Still here. That month, we launched a new project. The Unnamed Room. A space for stories without documentation, for artifacts without provenance, for memories that couldn't be proven, but were still true. We allowed children and visitors to sit in silence with the objects, to write fictional histories, to draw what might have happened, not as fantasy, but as a kind of justice. Sky designed the first installation, a pair of boots, a string of wooden beads, and a broken harmonica on a velvet pedestal. Above it, projected on the wall in warm gold lettering, *, if no one claimed you, we do. The exhibit became the most visited space in Echo House. We didn't anticipate what followed. Letters from people who'd lost everything in floods, in fires, in war. People who only remembered the shape of an object they couldn't save. People who drew their grief. We displayed them all. We called the wall Imagined Remembering. It was beautiful, and it was devastating. One morning, while reviewing international submissions, I found a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Celine Ainsworth. My aunt. My father's sister. She had all but disappeared after the estate auction. Hadn't spoken to my parents in over a decade. But there her name was, typed neatly at the bottom of a scanned submission form. She was donating something to Echo House. The item description, Thornton Estate Ledger, circa 1907 to 1975, includes handwritten inheritance entries, letters, marginalia. I stared at the screen so long my coffee went cold. We arranged a private meeting. She arrived wearing a navy peacoat and lavender gloves. Older, thinner, but her eyes, sharp and unsure, like mine. Alara, she said, not quite smiling. Aunt Celine. She pulled the ledger from her bag, placed it on the table. I took it the night of the auction, before the public arrived. I couldn't let it be catalogued by people who wouldn't understand it. She slid it across to me. It belongs here now, with you. I opened it slowly. Inside were dozens of pages. Names, births, heirloom exchanges, wedding dates, notes about property lines. But tucked in the back was something else. A folded letter, addressed to me, from Clara. My hands shook. I unfolded it. She had written it in the months before her passing, never sent it, just sealed it and tucked it into the ledger. Asterisk. Ilara, love. If you find this, then you've already done more than I ever asked. You found us again. You heard us, even after we were quiet for too long. I never meant for you to carry everything, but I see now that you were never alone. And that's what matters. Tell them, keep telling them. The things we pass down are not always tangible. Sometimes they're just courage. Love. Clara. I cried in front of Celine. She placed her hand over mine. And that was the day we stopped being estranged. She stayed on as a volunteer archivist. 2 months later, she co-authored a paper with me on intergenerational memory and narrative ethics. We presented it in Geneva. The room gave us a standing ovation. That summer, the Heirloom network expanded into refugee schools across Europe. We worked with trauma counselors to adapt storytelling methods for children processing displacement. We hosted workshops on how to create symbolic heirlooms when nothing physical could be retained. Paper rings, fabric tokens, voice recordings, fingerprints turned into stamps. Jonah led a digital memory mapping session in Krakow. Sky ran her first international exhibit, What We Didn't Get to Keep. It broke attendance records in 5 cities. Baina. At Grace House, we started a new tradition. Every child, upon turning 13, received a small wooden box. Inside was a mirror. Not to reflect vanity, but to remind them, you are the beginning of someone else's legacy. The boxes came with a scroll of blank paper and a pencil. We didn't tell them what to write. Some drew hearts. Some wrote wishes. Some left it blank for the future. We never opened them again. Just stored them. Hundreds, eventually. Stacked carefully in what we called the tomorrow room. One night, while locking up, I found a box sitting on my desk. No note. Just my name, carved into the lid. Inside, a mirror, a scroll, and the original brooch. Clara's, with a tag tied to it that said, "You are allowed to rest." NIST. I sat with it for a long time. And I wrote, for the first time in years, a letter to myself. Not a founder, not a director, just Ilara. Asterisk, you began this story with a broken thread and turned it into a quilt. You do not have to hold every stitch. It will keep going, even when you're not in the room. The next morning, I placed the brooch back in the gallery. Not because I had to, but because I finally could. Because I trusted them. All of them. And I had become something else. Not the guardian, but the ember. Still warm. Still watching. But ready to let the fire spread. That autumn, Sky came to me with a proposal. We want to take the brooches on a pilgrimage. A what? A world journey. All the places they've been referenced. All the places they could have ended up. I hesitated. What if they get lost? Then they'll become exactly what they were meant to be. She smiled. Legacy doesn't live in glass cases. It lives in risk. And just like that, I said yes. The brooches were packed, insured, documented, but also freed. The first stop, a community garden in Guatemala. The last scheduled stop, an orphanage in Mongolia. And in between, the world. Grace House felt quiet without them. But not empty. The stories didn't pause. They pulsed. And I finally began to write. Not grant reports. Not mission statements. But the book. Asterisk, the brooch that built a home. A memoir. A record. A gift. For the girl I was, for the world we were building. For whoever came next. Because stories, like brooches, only matter when you pass them on. And I was finally ready to let mine fly. The brooches left in early spring. Packed in temperature-controlled cases, lined with silk, and lined again with the whispered promises of children who'd pressed their palms to the glass one last time. Skye accompanied them. She insisted. "This isn't a tour," she said. "It's a return." And she was right. Because every place they visited wasn't new. It was familiar in some deep, bone-carved way. The brooches weren't discovering the world. They were remembering it. I stayed behind. For once, I didn't follow the legacy, I let it lead. And in the quiet that remained, I wrote. Page after page. Not for fame. Not for publication. Just to hold the line a little longer. Just to leave breadcrumbs for someone else. The memoir came slowly, like breath and cold air. The words fogged up the page, then cleared. I wrote in the attic, the kitchen, under the tree where Jonah had once buried his fear in a time capsule labeled, "Open when I'm brave enough." I wrote about Clara. About the auction. About the brooch. About the first child who asked if they were allowed to belong. Echo House hosted live dispatches from the brooch pilgrimage. Skye sent updates. In Guatemala, the brooches were placed on the dirt floor of a community circle, while elders told stories of items they'd smuggled across borders. One woman wept as she touched Evelyn's prototype. "My grandmother carved something like this into a button," she said. In Norway, the brooches sat in a Sami lodge, while children wove thread through pine needles, learning to remember with their hands. In Bangladesh, the brooches floated down a canal in a paper lantern boat, a ceremony to honor lost matriarchs. They called the project Nalatlanjasi in Motion Stas. The map filled with pins. The pins became stars. The stars became a constellation. And every time I looked up, I whispered, "There you are." The memoir was nearly complete when the publisher called. Yes, publisher. Paige had sent the manuscript without telling me. "I knew you wouldn't," she said, "and I knew they needed it." They offered an advance, a tour, a documentary tie-in. I said yes, then no, then maybe. Then finally, only if all proceeds go to the Heirloom network, and only if the last chapter remains blank. The editor paused. "Why?" "Because this story isn't finished, and it never will be." They agreed. We titled it, "The Brooch Belongs to Us." Skye returned in late autumn. Tired. Changed. Her eyes carried a depth that didn't ask for explanation. She hugged me on the steps of Grace House and said, "You were right, they do come home." She handed me the brooches. Not in a box, just wrapped in her scarf. She'd worn them, she confessed, just once. In a temple in Bhutan. In silence. She cried. I cried. We didn't explain it to anyone. Some stories don't require translation. Died. The final exhibit was built that winter. A room unlike any other. Round. No signs. No instructions. Just the brooches, placed on a single stone pedestal beneath a circular skylight that let the moonlight in at just the right angle. We called it Star the Listening Room. Visitors entered one at a time. No phones, no cameras. Just breath, memory, silence. We thought it would be a quiet corner. Instead, it became a sanctuary. People stayed for hours. Some left letters. Others left nothing. And that, too, was a kind of offering. One night, as snow crept down the windows, Ava found me in the kitchen. She was 16 now. Taller, bolder, always holding a journal. I want to lead the next archive project, she said, but I don't want to call it an archive. What then? She thought. A chorus. I smiled. Say more. Archives keep stories. Choruses carry them, together. She started work that week. The chorus project launched 6 months later. My parents came to visit for the first time since I'd bought the brooch back. They were quiet. Stunned, maybe. My mother lingered in the gallery. My father walked the path between Echo and Grace House in silence. When we gathered for dinner, they asked to say something. I didn't understand what you were doing, my mother said, but now I see it wasn't about rebellion. It was about remembering. My father added, and maybe repair. We hugged. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that, finally, was enough. The memoir was released that spring. The Brooch Belongs to Us became a bestseller. It was translated into 17 languages. We held no launch party. Just a quiet reading in the legacy circle, surrounded by the children, the staff, and a single lantern lit for Clara. I read the dedication aloud. Asterisk, for the ones who weren't believed, for the ones who never stopped telling the story anyway. We cried. We laughed. Jonah threw confetti. He said it was biodegradable. It wasn't. Sky chased him across the lawn with a broom. It was perfect. I turned 40 that summer. The children surprised me with a box. Inside, a brooch. Made of painted wood, glued beads, and a note that read, Asterisk, you gave us the first story. Now we'll carry the rest. I wore it for every event afterward. Even the ones with dignitaries and presidents and global directors. Especially those. Thanks. The final chapter never did get written. Not officially. But maybe that was the point. Some legacies are not chapters. They are echoes. Circles. Continuations. So I left the page blank. But taped to the inside back cover of every book was a small slip of paper that read, Asterisk, now it's your turn. And I meant it. Because by then, I understood. I was never the end of this story. Just the beginning. And the brooch? It was never mine. It never needed to be. Because the moment I gave it away, I finally understood what legacy really was. Not gold, not glass, but love, carried, shared, held, and still, miraculously, alive. The brooches no longer stayed in their case, not because we stopped protecting them, but because the world had stopped demanding proof. They lived now on rotation. Sometimes in a child's hand during a remembrance circle, sometimes pinned gently to the chest of a speaker at a memory forum. Sometimes simply resting on the desk in the tomorrow room, beside a cup of warm tea, like an old friend quietly watching over the future. No glass, no spotlight, just presence. And that, in the end, was what they had always been about. Presence. Grace House had grown into something even I couldn't fully name. Not just a shelter, not just an archive, not even just a foundation. It was, as Ava once called it, a pulse. People came from everywhere, not just to see or to donate or to learn, but to asterisk remember themselves. One woman, visiting from Rio de Janeiro, stood outside Echo House's listening room for 2 hours before entering. She emerged with a trembling smile and said only, I remembered my real name. We never asked what she meant. We just wrote it down in the guest book, and she pressed her thumbprint beside it. That had become our new tradition. No digital records. Just ink, skin, memory. The Chorus Project, Ava's brainchild, had become the single largest collaborative youth storytelling initiative in the world. Over 1.2 million children had submitted something. A song. A sentence. A photo of the shadow on their bedroom wall, they said, reminded them of someone they loved. We never edited them. We just held them. And Sky, ever the steward, declared, there are no unimportant stories, only ones we forget to hold long enough. She was nominated for a Global Peace Award that year. She declined it. The children already gave me what matters, she said. I don't need a statue. I started writing less. Not because there was less to say, but because others were saying it now. Ava published a collection of poems titled Time's Objects We Loved Too Loudly. Jonah launched an illustrated anthology called Boys Don't Cry, But They Do Sing. Meredith founded a transnational cooperative of memory circles. They met once a month across time zones. No agenda, no structure, Just space. And Grace House? It had begun to disappear. Not physically, but as the Pinterest center. Because the legacy was no longer contained within walls. It was rippling out. And that was the goal. One day, a boy named Ishan, a soft-spoken 12-year-old who had only arrived weeks before, came up to me while I was sweeping the porch. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Were you scared when you bought the brooch back?" I nodded, terrified. "But you still did it." "Because some things are worth doing, even afraid." He thought for a while, then handed me a folded paper. Inside, a pencil sketch of the brooch, wings sprouting from its sides, lifting a tiny house behind it into the sky. He'd titled it, "She Set the Story Free." I hung it above my desk. In late spring, Paige came to me with news. "You've been nominated." "For what?" "The Human Legacy Prize." I stared. That was the kind of award given once a generation, usually to world leaders, scientists, founders of revolutions. "I'm not accepting." "I know," she said, smiling, "but you should still go." The ceremony was in Prague. I brought the children. All of them. We filled 3 planes. On the night of the event, they insisted I wear something special. Sky had tailored a simple linen coat. Jonah embroidered the lining with every child's initials. Marisol stitched the phrase, "Still here," into the cuff. I pinned the brooch, not the original but Ishan's paper one, to my collar. When they called my name, I stood. But I didn't go alone. Sky, Ava, Paige, Meredith, they came with me. We stood on the stage. I said this. I did not build this. We did. With memory. With mercy. With the quiet, defiant belief that a broken inheritance can still become a home. And the next generation? They're not just remembering. They're remaking. The applause felt like thunder under my ribs. Back at Grace House, the children had painted a new mural across the front gate. 2 hands. One holding the brooch. One letting it go. In the middle, the words, "Asterisk. The story belongs to whoever is brave enough to carry it next." I stepped down later that year. Not from the legacy, just from the leadership. Ava took over the foundation. Sky became the head of memory programs. Jonah directed youth outreach. Marisol became our global spokesperson. And I became the librarian. Not metaphorically. Literally. I cataloged every story. Shelved every letter. Labeled each shoebox. It was quiet. And it was everything. One afternoon, a girl named Esme wandered into the archive. She held a chipped teacup. "It's all I have left of her," she whispered. "My mom, she used to drink from it when she was scared." I nodded. "Would you like to write something about her?" She shook her head, then placed the cup gently in the center of the table and began to sing. Softly, unsteadily, but fully. When she finished, she looked at me. "Will it stay?" "Forever," I promised. Years passed. Not in silence, but in song. Sky married a poet. Ava adopted twins. Jonah opened a boys' home in Lisbon. Marisol became a senator. And the brooch? It vanished. One day, it was just gone. No theft, no break-in, no clue. Only a note on the pedestal. Asterisk. It has moved on. Let it fly. We didn't panic. We didn't replace it. We just built a new case beside it. And inside that case, we placed a teacup, a button, a child's sketch, and a mirror. Visitors still come, still cry, still whisper. And every so often, someone will ask, "Where is the brooch?" We point to the mirror and say, "If the story touched you, it's already there." And it is. Always. carried, shared, held, alive. I used to believe stories ended, that there would be a final sentence, a closing image, a door gently shutting behind us as we walked away, healed, whole, done. But standing now in the center of Grace House, in a gallery no longer named, in a hall filled with children who have become storytellers, builders, keepers, I know better. Stories don't end. They echo. They change forms. They shift hands. They stretch across generations and borders, and even the silence between two people who don't yet know how to say, I love you. They endure. It's been 30 years since I bought the brooch back. 30. The building is older now, we all are. But there's something about the floorboards. They creak the same way. Familiar, kind. Grace House has grown to include 7 satellite homes across 5 continents. Echo House became a learning institute. It teaches memory studies, intergenerational ethics, and narrative preservation. We've trained over 20,000 memory carriers. The Chorus Project became a global youth movement. It's entirely run by under 25s. They've published 17 anthologies, all curated by children. And the Tomorrow Room? It's full. Thousands of wooden boxes, each containing a mirror, a scroll, a breath of belief. We've never opened a single one. I no longer live at Grace House. I live in a cottage not far from the coast, where the wind sounds like Clara's handwriting and the birds carry stories in their wings. But I visit often. Unannounced, no fanfare. Sometimes I sit in the garden, other times in the archive. The librarians pretend not to recognize me. I like it that way. Sky once said, the more invisible you become, the more the story can breathe. She was right. On the 30th anniversary, they threw a celebration. I tried to stay out of sight. Didn't work. Sky, now gray at the temples, tracked me down. Ava followed, holding her daughter's hands. Jonah brought a pie. Marisol arrived in a helicopter. Of course she did. There were banners. Candles. A choir of 40 children singing a song called She Carried the Light. I cried before the first verse. When they finished, a girl named Noor stepped forward. She was 8. She held a slip of paper. Miss Alara, she said, we have a gift. It was a certificate, admitting me into the Children's Hall of Legacy Keepers. Because you didn't just save the brooch, she read. You saved the people who were never supposed to be remembered. My knees gave out. Ava caught me. That night, long after the lanterns dimmed, I sat alone in the listening room. The pedestal still stood. The brooch was still missing. But beside it now were thousands of items. A hand-drawn map from a girl in Syria. A torn backpack from a boy in Brazil. A harmonica. A teacup. And, at the very center, a framed mirror. Below it, you are the legacy. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in years, I heard Clara's voice. You did it, Ilara. You brought us home. I whispered back. No, they did. I just left the light on. The memoir has been translated into 43 languages. It's taught in universities, read aloud in shelters, whispered over in midnight confession circles. One professor wrote me to say, it isn't a book, it's a door. I framed that letter, hung it beside the first live stream photo, the one where I stood, trembling, bidding on the brooch I didn't know would change the world. Sometimes I touch the frame, not to relive it, but to remind myself the courage was real, even when I was scared, especially then. I'm older now, and I don't have many more books in me, but I have one more chapter. This one. Not an ending. Just a passing of the flame. Because someone, somewhere, is sitting in a room right now, holding a chipped teacup or a paper brooch, or a story they don't yet know how to tell. And they need to know. It matters. It's enough. It belongs. You belong. And when you're ready, you will give it away. And it will grow. and it will carry you. And someone, one day, will hold it with trembling hands and say, "She didn't just remember, she restored." And that will be the beginning of your story, of our story, of the next chapter. Still unwritten, still alive, still waiting for you. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.